Well, good morning. I'm Toby Rubbra, and I trust that you can all see and hear me okay, and that the broadband down here in Dartmoor stays alive for us for the next hour or so. This morning, I'm going to be talking about something that we in Vanguard pay a lot of attention to and is particularly important, and that is the subject of how we go about influencing others and generating curiosity in a better way of designing and managing service beyond command and control. When I was preparing for this session, I reflected back to the time that I myself joined Vanguard, scarily 18 years ago now, although in some ways it seems like yesterday. I guess that's the joys of doing something that doesn't feel like a job. But back then, as I still do today, I found the power of the Vanguard method in illuminating the reality of a system so profound. My natural reaction was, of course, to shout about it, to sort of rush up to people and talk very enthusiastically about what I was seeing and able to learn about systems to pretty much everybody I could meet. And I'm sure most of them thought I was pretty bonkers. So I guess what I've been learning over the last 18 years and I'm still learning about is how to be an interventionist. And for clarity, what I mean by an interventionist is somebody who's able to not only understand a better way of doing something, and for that component of the Vanguard method, we refer to that as systems theory. But secondly, crucially, how one is able to help others to understand the same. So if I've seen something, then how do I help others to see the same? And then obviously based on that insight and knowledge, how to help them to then go on to realize the benefits of those new and better ways of thinking. So that second part of the Vanguard method is what we call the intervention theory. So I guess what led us to planning the session today was driven not only by this topic amongst our own consulting community, but since we rejuvenated our network, a lot of members have come back to myself and my colleagues. And I guess the sort of prevailing thinking or thoughts were around, I really get this. I can see some really exciting opportunities about doing things differently in my service or across my organization. But I keep running into people who think I'm talking Chinese. They don't really understand me. They're preoccupied about their existing plans and projects and initiatives. And in fact, they're sort of blocking or not helping me to progress. So this is a common issue for us all as interventionists, and I guess my assumption, because you're all signed up today, is that sort of rings a bell and is familiar for you. So the purpose of really the session today, just to drill it down, is to share some of my insights and thoughts and learning and tactics that I hope will help equip you to be better able to influence others and raise curiosity. So the framework really for the next 40, 50 minutes or so is broadly split into 4 parts. Firstly, importantly, but quite quickly, I think I want to recap the core Vanguard message that improving performance is a thinking thing, not a doing thing. Secondly, I want to talk through the 3 main approaches to change and why normative change is fundamentally important. Like learning to swim, changing thinking cannot be delegated. Thirdly, the importance of really understanding the perspective and assumptions of those you want to influence before you try and influence or raise curiosity in them. And lastly, I suppose some tactics and insights for designing learning loops so that those people who you're wanting to influence or get on board can go through their own self-discovery. To get us started, I thought we should really start by recapping on a fundamental premise underpinning the Vanguard method. So that's firstly that this notion that achieving profound and sustainable performance improvement is a thinking thing. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with one of our key relationships. But for those of you who maybe aren't, or just to recap this for you all, I want you to imagine that there are three boxes, one on top of the other. In the bottom box, there is the word performance. And by performance, we tend to talk about how well we are delivering service, how efficiently we're delivering that service, if there is any revenue component to the system, how effectively are we generating revenue, and lastly, but by no means least, morale. So how are staff and managers feeling about that system? So those four elements, we tend to refer to it as SERM, make up performance. Bottom box. In the middle box is the word system. And system are all of those components from the customer right through to delivery of the outcomes or needs for that customer. So it's the processes, it's the management that sits around it, it's all the targets, the governance, the risk, the regulation, everything that makes up the system. Now, of course, most of the current change or activity around improvement is a relationship between what's happening in our system and driving performance. And often what we find is that something goes awry from a performance point of view. Normally costs need controlling. So the system responds by going in and doing yet more initiatives around cost cutting or control. What very rarely happens is on the top box is the word thinking. And what that means is, what are the perspectives and assumptions that are shaping the system in terms of how it's designed and managed, that then in turn influences performance. So that is a critical relationship, and one that we often talk about as being invisible. The visible part being the system, the relationship between the system box and the performance box, the invisible relationship being between the thinking and the system. Another way of helpfully also talking about that relationship is swapping around some of the words in those three boxes. So sometimes in the top box, we talk about the perspective and the assumptions that are being taken. So typically command to control perspective will be top down, hierarchical, and a lot of the assumptions from command and control are around functionalization or standardization, a focus on activity costs and targets, etc. So top box is often helpfully looked at or talked about in terms of those perspectives and assumptions, and depending on what perspectives and assumptions people hold, that in turn drives in the middle box the words assumptions and strategies, actions and strategies. So you know those are the things that we actually set about doing or planning to do, and of course all of those have consequences. So in the bottom box there, consequences. So I just wanted to reiterate that this sort of framework and relationship, and making that an empirical relationship, almost like wiring together and making visible the thinking system performance or assumptions, actions and consequences is incredibly important. And as I said earlier, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. If you're not, obviously we've got lots more resources and insights into that critical part of the Vanguard method on our site. I guess what's important, and why I wanted to start with that that crucial relationship, is that your job as an influencer is to make the invisible visible. So it's all about helping somebody to see and understand what is currently hidden, and crucially the real consequences of their thinking. I suppose as a tactic here, what I would also strongly recommend is that you think about some very personal examples where you can talk about something that happened to change your thinking. So, for example, you might think about it in terms of you woke up on a Monday morning and you passionately believed or assumed that X was the right thing to do. But through the course of Monday, something happened, and that reframed that assumption. So by the afternoon or evening, you had learned something to challenge that assumption. It reframed it. So what I would encourage you all to have a think about is, what was it that happened, and how did it happen? Because if you're able to sort of recount some personal experiences of learning and understanding, then it will greatly help in terms of what you need to do to frame for others. What not to do with others is start by saying, well, of course, you need to change your thinking, as this is guaranteed to have a pretty adverse reaction. Because, of course, everybody, we all, don't we wake up in the morning believing that we are normal, rational, sensible human beings. Well, most of us do that anyway. So, it's not about getting into a right or wrong. It's about understanding that the people you're trying to work with and influence, have their own frames of reference. This is about how to reorientate those frames of reference. So what to do? Well, this leads us on, I guess, to the second part of the session here, which was just to run through with you and recap the three main approaches to change. And these are the rational approach, a coercive approach, or, as I've started to touch on and you would have picked up, thirdly, what we call a normative approach. So, rational. You may recognize these approaches from your past experience in trying to gain commitment for change. Equally, very likely, you may recognize them as being tried upon yourself. For example, somebody or you engaging in an energetic conversation where you demonstrate your deep commitment, whilst hoping that some sort of magic in your enthusiasm and energy will transfer to the person in the conversation. Another very common rational approach is presenting detailed reports or PowerPoint presentations setting out why change is needed and how it should be undertaken. It's important to remember that just because you think something's a good idea, you should not expect everybody to automatically agree with you. Additionally, some individuals may accept that what you're saying, but then go on to reframe it from their current perspective. So again, you need to be careful when you think you're hearing people agreeing with you, but you're not validating how they're translating that according to their current perspective and assumptions. Okay, so that's the summary of the normal, I guess, way that change or interactions, the rational. Coercion is really an extension of that, but normally delivered by somebody who has a legitimate power base, so somebody senior, just basically telling the person to do it and to do it this way, or there will be consequences, either favourable consequences because there will be some sort of reward or recognition if they follow the party line, the requirements, the mandate, or some adverse consequences of punishment in some way if they don't. This can be like the rational approaches, useful as a tactic for people and for leaders, but it's certainly not sustainable. And again, like the rational approach, coercion won't change any thinking. So we're left then with the third aspect, which is normative change, and we passionately believe this is the most effective way to change sustainably people's behaviours and thinking, and therefore how they manifest that in the design and management of work. And normative learning is best described as changing thinking through seeing and doing some sort of action. And why that's so important is that, you know, the norms that we all have here, those frameworks which we try and make sense of the world around us, we need to help people to reframe those norms. So action, doing something or seeing something for oneself, physically seeing it, is crucial because it makes it real. Normative describes a situation where somebody sees for themselves, obviously, the need to change. If you hold that principle, that normative approach is more effective and that people need to see for themselves why their thinking might need to change, then obviously that opens up different approaches to explore in terms of tactics around how to do that. And I guess that's the hook for me in terms of this word we used in the title around raising curiosity. Curiosity is a very, very important hook to start to work with somebody around changing their thinking. You know, hopefully most people have some sort of curiosity. I guess the trick is understanding what would make them curious. This hook around curiosity and the importance of obviously taking a normative approach. So the second sort of insight and part that I want to share with you is the importance of really getting under the skin and understanding the world of and the viewpoints of those you want to influence. And again, from my experience, you know, we can fall into a trap of making assumptions that we know about somebody. So again, you know, before you can really design some effective learning loops for somebody, you really do need to understand them. And obviously, if you're in a hierarchical organization, and in many cases you're going to be wanting to influence maybe somebody more senior than yourself, then again, even creating some opportunities to interact with those more senior people so that you can understand their world in its own right might present some interesting challenges for you. But the real purpose here is to in effect build a relationship with that person and start to establish a different power base with them from which you can start to influence. So some hooks, maybe some suggestions for that initial meeting. And again, I'm thinking about those of you who might be wanting to influence somebody more senior in your hierarchy, is to approach them from the basis of a question such as, I would really appreciate understanding more about the challenges that we're facing into. It would be really helpful if you could share some more insights into the way we're going about this, or how could I best help you? So again, my counsel there is be useful, be proactive, be keen, and really your objective here is just to create an opportunity for a conversation with that person. That's all you're wanting to do. And hopefully they will respond to that and create the opportunity for the two of you to sit down together. And at that point, then, what I would do, and I would encourage you to do, is give them a damn good listening to. Not put anything onto them necessarily at that point, but really just your objective is to find out more about them and their perspectives, what they're worrying about, what they're paying attention to, what's important to them, what's motivating them in the short or long term, etc. Now we use for that a framework. It was devised by a chap called Gerald Egan. Some of you might have heard of Egan. And his simple sort of 3-stage framework starts with stage 1, which is all about this profound and deep listening and understanding building with somebody. So you need to create a safe space for you both to create that environment for listening. You need to be empathetic, you need to be sympathetic, you need to be generous, warm, respectful, but also in terms of how you're drawing out understanding of their own assumptions and perspectives, you validate things back to them. So you're making concrete their views, their thoughts, their world for you. Don't at this point be judgmental or confrontational. It's not helpful to getting people to open up. So hopefully those conversations will give you a better understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it in that way. Chris has asked, is raising curiosity independent of personal learning styles? Well, yes, Chris, I think it is, because what hopefully you're hearing me talk about is actually a method. So regardless of learning styles, obviously you need to be sensitive to how people might learn and understand things, but really that's the beauty of having a method, is that although people might have different learning styles, it can still work. Any thoughts about, Julian asked, any thoughts about influencing senior groups who can't make decisions as a group? Now that's a good question, Julian. It's one of the problems, I believe, with our woefully ineffective leadership at the moment, is that even very senior people can't seem to make a decision. But you're right. Why that's a really good question is, of course, one of the challenges for you when you're influencing people is it's not just one person, it's often more than one person. So again, tactically in that situation, I think you really need to, my counsel is be pragmatic and start with those leaders who you think you can maybe get to quicker or easier. And then, of course, when you've got them on side, you can use them to help you build connections and insights and connectivity with the other. Good. So I think where I'd left off was just describing this importance of really getting yourself them-centric. So whoever you are trying to influence or understand. I talked about Egan, particularly stage 1. That's giving somebody a damn good listening to. Just for some of you raised questions about, well, what were the other 2 stages? Stage 2 is when you start to introduce an alternative frame for them. And stage 3 is about agreeing some sort of concrete course of action. But at this stage, I really just wanted to focus on stage 1. Now, the linkage really for you is that, of course, I'm taking the view that you have seen something or have been doing something great, different, better, and somebody over there is the person you're trying to influence. And the reason why you're wanting to get them really understand their world is so that you can design. Design might sound a bit grand, but that's a word I would use. You design a situation for them where they can then learn for themselves something that, in a way, reframes their current perspective that you have just confirmed and made concrete in your discussions with them. So, in terms of designing learning loops, your job is, first of all, to make clear for yourself the link between their assumptions and consequences on performance. And so when you've had your conversations, and it might be more than one, or it might be a series of meetings, whatever, but you think you're more confident now in understanding their perspectives and their assumptions. What you've got to do then is make sure that you know enough about what's going on in the work that would be useful then to design something that they can go and see for themselves, which would therefore reframe those assumptions. So that's really the important thing that you need to do. And then secondly, obviously you need to hook them in to actually turn up and see for themselves something, and that's where I think this raising curiosity is really important. So again, it's got to be based on what you know is important to them, because they won't be curious about something that's not important to them. But if they are, you know that they're really worrying about something, and you can see something, you know something that is really going to help that, but they can't see it yet. That's the hook to create a loop around. And this is all part of, the other word I use a lot is creating a yesable proposition. It's something that they would find hard to say, no, I don't want to get involved in that. So it's a yesable proposition to go take a look. That's what you're aiming for there. So let me just talk about some tactics here. And interestingly, some of these tactics might actually revert to a rational approach in the outset, but don't forget that's to then get them into the normative environment. For example, now you know more about that person, you'll probably be better able to identify how best that individual might generate their own curiosity. For example, you could give them an article or a book to read, or point them at a short video to watch. You might have created some data, some resources of your own that you can share with others. There are lots of examples and resources in our own site, which I'm sure some of you have explored, but I would encourage you to do that, because they are obviously all designed with the intent to create curiosity to be used as hooks for that. So please do go and have a look at the site. And then secondly, rather than spending time writing detailed reports or PowerPoint presentations, what I would encourage you to do is invite people to spend time with you, in the work, so that they can see for themselves the impact of their current thinking on the system. I appreciate that many of you do need to write something, but if you do, I would encourage you to do it in a way that recognizes their preoccupations, so they can see that you're understanding their world, but reframes the approach to delivering it. a common example that I'm seeing a lot with leaders I'm working with at the moment is the assumption around cost. So for many leaders, cost is a real preoccupation, and the assumption may well be, but please, it's important that you would validate that through your understanding conversations. But the way I would describe their current preoccupation is an assumption that all demand or everything that's coming into their system or service is work, and work means activity, and activity means people, FTE, that horrible acronym that's sometimes used or often used, and obviously FTE equals cost. So there is a sort of QED, if you like, for many leaders in that space, that if we're wanting to save cost, it's about managing activity or managing people. So what's very, very common for service organizations that is currently invisible is that the fact that demand does not equal work. Demand is made up, as many of you know, between value demand and failure demand. So that for me is a really, really useful hook. So it's something that you could do. You could do some work to get some real insights around demand and use that as a mechanism to generate curiosity and say, look, come and have a listen, come and validate this for yourself, what we're hearing here or what we're seeing coming into our team, our department, our organization. It's a really, really powerful hook. And when they go look, they hear for themselves that failure demand, and that's when you get that really, really crucial normative learning, and it goes, aha, blimey, you know, I woke up this morning, I thought that everything that hits us, measured normally in volume, is work to be done, and now I can see that there's a really important opportunity that was invisible to me before. So you know, that's the start of them getting curious. They should sort of pull on you to say, oh, that was interesting, I didn't know that. You know, is there any other things that you could show me? So it not only equips them, it creates more curiosity, but also importantly for yourselves, it's starting to build a different power base to leverage with them more influence. Really, really important. And I guess for me, another example of this, which I hope might bring this to life, and I've talked about it and written about it quite a bit recently, was a leader I worked with in part of an insurance company recently, and Andrea was the director of the home claims function. And when I first met Andrea, she was very preoccupied about quite an extensive list of projects that she was responsible for delivering. There was quite a large budget associated with those projects, and obviously an associated savings target. So much of her working day was, are we on track with X? Are we going to, you know, miss our milestones? Or are we on track? So there were sort of RAG statuses around that. And then I suppose the other thing that she was preoccupied was just the sort of day-to-day operational metrics. So are we on, are our SLAs green? And I guess when I first, she had got curious because somebody in one of her teams had been studying with John at Cardiff on his MBA program, and he had come back and started to do some work in one of Andrea's teams, and she had started to sort of get curious, and the hook for that was around this idea of demand. But when I met her, she was really looking very much at the world through her targets, her deliverables, both from the B8 business as usual and from the projects. So what I had to do was study her system for a period of time to find some examples or situations that would cause that cognitive dissonance for her, to then hopefully start help her to reframe what was happening. And what I did was I listened to some calls coming in. They call them FNOL, first notification of loss. So it's somebody who's had something, maybe their house has been broken into, damaged, there's been a flood, whatever. This particular call I listened to was a pretty horrific case of a couple whose house had caught fire. So I listened to that, and then I worked out that in a few days' time, the internal sort of claims handler, they called them sort of loss adjuster people, was going to go out and visit this couple. So I managed to do enough curiosity raising with Andrea to encourage her to come with me. So we both arrived at this property, and pretty much immediately what Andrea started to see was her claims handler sort of reading through a script from his laptop about, could you give me your full names? Could you give me your address? I mean, we're standing in the garden of their house, for God's sake. So she was starting to, I could almost hear her brain go, why are we asking all these questions? We know the answers. And then it got a little bit more sort of sensitive when have you had any claims or convictions? And she saw the wife was sort of in tears looking at her burnt out house. So immediately she started to have an emotional response to what was happening. By the end of the visit, I have to say that Andrea was in a bit of a state, because she thought that she was very customer focused, that they were doing the right things and they were doing them most efficiently. So, just that one normative experience was enough to knock her off in a safe way, her what I would call comfortable perch, and really disorientate or get her to challenge a lot of those assumptions that she originally had. So that was really the start then, because once you've got them hooked in and curious, what she then wanted to do, and it wasn't me who suggested it. She said, I want to go and listen to the FNOL call. I want to hear what we did when that call came in on the Saturday morning. And of course, then she unraveled the fact that, again, her teams who are in the contact centres, she realised that the call had been transferred between a couple of teams before it actually came through to somebody who started to work with that policyholder. And again, they were following the script and they weren't really understanding what was important, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Barry's added something recently, which I agree with. Quite often what happens is there is a pat on the back and a well done, but also a yes but, and a desire by leaders to put back the command and control measures which have shown to negatively impact on performance. I guess, Barry, what we've got there is not an uncommon situation where the leaders really haven't understood it. They've rationalized it, so they haven't had a normative experience. And again, my counsel there, Barry, would be, it goes back to what I said sort of at the outset, which is the importance of, in a way, spending enough time to really understand their views of the world. Because clearly, if they're migrating back to what they think is important around the command and control measures, that's what they believe. They believe that that is giving them control and making them feel safe and sleep well at night. So, the tactic there would be to say, they obviously haven't seen the dysfunction of those current measures. That's why they're putting them back. Because if they did, as clearly Barry, they're causing a lot of problems. That's why they want to put them back. So again, it's about making very, very explicit and clear with them and concrete that is what they really believe. These are important, and then disrupting that. Because if it's done in a rational way, they will just migrate back. John asked, you said he can describe 3 stages. I hope I clarified that earlier. It's stage 1 is understanding, stage 2 is offering an alternative, and stage 3 is agreeing some sort of plan of action. Sarah has said, have you got any tips for influencing senior managers who have quite negative attitudes? Well, Sarah, I mean, if there are a lot of people who will be negative, I suppose, again, I come back, Sarah, to, my immediate question is, well, when you say they're negative, what are they negative about? And finding out why they are negative. Because obviously you're picking up that somebody's, they're not interested, or they're putting the dampeners on things. But I suppose the critical thing I'm asking is why. So again, I would encourage you to try, and it might be very hard work. Sometimes it is, if they are negative, but just give them a good listening to. Say, why? What's going on there? Why are you so negative? Hope that helps there. Ed has asked, are there any subtle differences in approach as an internal change agent than, say, an external consultant? Ed, yes, there is. And it's to do with power bases. You see, often to sometimes the huge frustration of internal change agents, maybe this is like yourself, Ed, I might arrive in an organization and suddenly doors open and people engage, and they often come up to me in the canteen, oh bloody hell, how come you sort of turned up and I've been trying for ages? And fundamentally this is about power bases, because you see, most of you will be part of a hierarchical organization, and therefore there is this constant sort of looking at, well, who is this guy? What's his rank and number? Is this somebody who is above me in the pecking order? Do I need to pay attention to them or not? Which is, of course, incredibly frustrating for you if you're that change agent. But it's the reality of being in a hierarchical organisation. Whereas as an external consultant, I'm immune from that. And of course, what we would always pay attention to right from the get-go is how are we designing and getting to as many of the senior leaders as possible. Because of course, once you get to the execco, the top team, you've got a lot more influence and jurisdiction of changing thinking across the system. So it's a great question. It's all about the power bases. I think, tactically, what I would encourage you to do there is get robust data and insights, because, at the end of the day, if you get some real data about how performance is being suboptimized in whatever way, and you use that to generate curiosity in that leader or leaders to come and have a look, to validate for themselves, that's what you want to do. And hopefully that way, as I said earlier, you're building your own referent power base. Yeah, Sonia's just said really useful points about using data to drive curiosity when you're an internal change agent. So thanks, Sonia. I hope that validates some of my points. Okay, well, look, as I said at the outset, what you might want to do is go away and have a bit of a think about what we've talked about in this session. And please do come back to me with some further questions. Very, very happy to engage and help on those. So really, just to summarize before I close off, I guess there are 5 points of summary to share with you. Point 1 is all about equipping yourselves with your own personal change thinking stories, because I think they will greatly help you design scenarios for others, and very importantly, keep you in the change thinking space rather than the activity doing something space. And often you can test these with your partner, your friends, just to because sometimes we do it naturally with friends and family. It doesn't really matter what it's about, because the point there, what I'm making with that point 1 is that you are, you're creating some real stories that are personal to you about that very important empirical relationship between thinking or assumptions, actions, and consequences. The second point is that everybody will have their own variants of thinking, so those variants of perspectives and assumptions. So engaging rationally is very likely to cause an adverse reaction, and obviously coercively will drive short-term compliance. They will follow because somebody with more power and influence has told them to do that. But really, understanding the reality of their current thinking on performance is what's important, and that can only really be achieved by challenging their norms. So you're reframing what's going on in here. The 4th point I would say is practice listening. It might sound sort of bleeding obvious and straightforward, but believe you me, I'm still learning on this one. How to get good at really listening to people and understanding their frames of reference, and finding out what matters to them. So again, it's something that you can practice with maybe in a safer environment with some of your peers or team. I really encourage you to get good at listening to people and drawing out and making concrete their perspectives and assumptions. So practice stage 1 Egan. Good stuff. And lastly, this is about, once you've found some way, some hook of getting them curious, get them to go look for themselves. This is the only way they'll have a normative experience. And you might need to hold their hand during that. Little plug and reminder, I'm, for my sins, in charge of organising our big Eradicating Failure Demand gig, which some of you might be aware of, but if you're not, I would encourage you to go and have a look at the blurb and hopefully sign up for it. It's on the 15th of November. It's at a really nice venue called the Forest of Arden, which is just up near Birmingham Airport, so it's quite easy to get to logistically by road, planes, trains, stuff like that. So that's the 15th of November. If you're a network member, or because it's still early days, you can get an early bird rates. So please talk to my colleagues in the office and they'll sort out a good deal for you if you get on and book now. So I hope to see you at that. So on that note, thanks very much, and over and out. Bye-bye. Thank you.